Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My father lifted his glass, the room already buzzing with chatter and wine-fueled laughter. I'd barely settled into my seat when he tapped the side of his glass and said, with that familiar smirk, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." The table erupted in laughter. Loud, careless, the kind that stings even if no one means it to. But he meant it. He always meant it. I felt the heaviness crawl up my throat for a moment, that old instinct to shrink, to disappear, to swallow myself whole so no one could call me a burden again. But instead, something warm rose in my chest. Defiance, maybe. Or freedom. I wasn't sure yet. I smiled. Slowly, calmly, the kind of smile that made my father's eyes narrow. "Good thing," I said lightly. "I just got my own place 2,000 miles away." "Don't worry." I lifted my own glass. "You'll never have to deal with the burden of me again." Silence. The kind that replaces laughter like a slammed door. He stared at me, stunned, not because of what I said, but because I finally said it out loud. The room was glowing with soft yellow lights, the kind that usually made family dinners feel warm and familiar. But that night, comfort had no place at the table. My father, already 3 glasses in, stood up with the exaggerated pride of a man who loved an audience more than the people seated before him. He tapped his glass with a fork, calling for attention the way a performer demands silence before the punchline. I knew that tone. I knew that smirk. I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was coming next wasn't meant for celebration. He lifted his glass higher, his eyes scanning the table until they landed on me. His lips curled. "Some kids make you proud," he announced, pausing long enough to let everyone lean in. "Others just take up space." A burst of laughter shot across the table, sharp and careless. Someone even clapped. I felt the sound hit me like cold water, first shocking, then numbing. I watched my cousins hide awkward smiles behind their drinks, my aunts exchanging glances, my mother pretending she didn't hear anything at all. It was a script we'd all played before. He insulted, they laughed, I swallowed it. But this time, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, quietly, like a door unlocking in a room I had never dared to enter. I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes, the tightening in my throat, the instinct to shrink into my chair and pretend it didn't hurt. For years I had learned to camouflage my pain so well that even I believed it sometimes. But as their laughter echoed around me, I realized I was no longer willing to be the punchline of someone else's joke, especially not his. I sat up straighter, lifting my chin just enough for him to notice. And as the laughter died down, I let the silence settle around me, not as a shield, but as my own declaration that I was done pretending his words didn't bruise. Without raising my voice, without a tremor in my hands, I smiled. A real smile. One that said, "I heard you, and I'm done letting it define me." He didn't expect me to answer back. He never did. He was used to me lowering my gaze, giving a nervous laugh, pretending I didn't feel the sting. But this time, when I lifted my eyes to meet his, there was something in me he didn't recognize. Calm, steady refusal. For a split second, I saw confusion flicker across his face, as if the script he'd rehearsed for years suddenly had missing lines. The room seemed to lean in, waiting for me to shrink the way I always had. But instead, I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, kept the same soft smile, and let my voice break the heavy silence. "Good thing," I said lightly, almost playfully. "I just got my own place 2,000 miles away." The words floated into the air, gentle but sharp enough to cut through the lingering laughter. A few people paused mid-sip. Someone coughed. My mother froze, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. My father blinked, clearly thrown off balance, trying to read me in a way he had never bothered to before. I felt their eyes on me, curious, startled, maybe even impressed. But for once, it didn't make my chest tighten. Instead, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a dim room. I picked up my glass and added, with the same calm that was pulsing through my veins, "Don't worry. You'll never have to deal with the burden of me again." This wasn't anger. It wasn't rebellion. It was something quieter, stronger, like choosing myself out loud. For years, I'd built small parts of my life in secret, saving money, applying to jobs far away, dreaming of a place where I wasn't always walking on the sharp edge of someone else's disappointment. And now, finally, those dreams had weight. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't have a comeback. He didn't have a joke. He just stared, as if the version of me sitting across from him had stepped out of a reality he never expected to face. I felt my heartbeat slow, settle, anchor. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a child waiting for approval. I felt like a woman choosing her freedom. I left the dinner early that night. Not in anger, not in a dramatic storm out, just quietly, with a calm that surprised even me. The cool night air met my skin like a reminder that there was a whole world outside that house, outside those words, outside the version of me he kept pinned down with his expectations. My car smelled faintly of vanilla from the little air freshener I'd bought the week before, and as soon as I slid into the seat, I let out a breath I didn't even know I had been holding. It was as if the moment I stepped away from that table, the weight of years, of comments, of comparisons, of subtle jabs disguised as jokes, started loosening their grip around my chest. The drive home felt different. The streetlights cast long golden shadows on the pavement, and for the first time, I wasn't rehearsing arguments in my head or swallowing things I wished I'd said. Tonight I had spoken. I had looked my father in the eyes and chosen myself, openly, unapologetically. When I reached my apartment, the one I'd been temporarily staying in before the big move, I pushed the door open and stood in the doorway for a moment. It wasn't much, just a small place with mismatched furniture and boxes stacked in corners, but tonight it felt like the beginning of something. Like standing on the threshold between who I had been forced to be and who I was finally becoming. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights blinking from afar. My phone buzzed with texts from cousins asking if I was okay, from an aunt telling me I shouldn't have said that to my father, from my mother sending a single message. "We'll talk later." I put the phone face down. For once, I didn't want to explain myself, justify myself, or shrink myself for anyone's comfort. The truth was simple. I had outgrown that house, that atmosphere, that constant feeling of not being enough. And the move, my new job, my new apartment across the country wasn't just a relocation. It was liberation. I walked through the small space, touching the boxes labeled kitchen, books, memories, and dreams. A label I had written in a moment of impulsive hope. I laughed at myself softly, realizing how true it was. Everything I had been too scared to want openly was now packed and waiting for me to carry it into a life where I didn't have to apologize for existing. Standing there in the quiet, I felt something shift. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was finally breathing. Maybe it was the simple truth that my life could be bigger than a table full of people who laughed at my pain. I wasn't running away. I was running toward myself. The first few weeks in my new city were a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I was thousands of miles away from everything familiar, the streets I grew up on, the routine arguments, the stale heaviness that clung to every corner of my parents' house. Here, everything smelled different. The air was crisper, the mornings brighter, and even the strangers on the streets seemed kinder simply because they didn't know who I had been or what I had endured. My apartment, though small, felt like a sanctuary. The windows let in warm light every morning, and the hum of the city below became a soundtrack I didn't know I needed. There were nights I lay awake listening to distant sirens and laughter drifting from nearby cafes, feeling the beautiful quiet inside my own chest. A quiet I'd never known in a home where I was always bracing for the next criticism. Work became a place where I finally felt seen. My new supervisor encouraged my ideas instead of dismissing them. Coworkers complimented my strengths, my creativity, my problem-solving, my dedication, and for the first time, I believed them. I started holding myself differently, speaking with more certainty, taking up space without apologizing for it. It was like discovering parts of myself I didn't even know existed, because they had been buried under years of belittlement. Slowly, new friendships bloomed. People invited me out for brunch, sent me memes, remembered my birthday, small gestures that felt huge to someone who had spent years trying to prove her worth to people who refused to see it. I laughed more often, real laughter that came from someplace unguarded. I tried new things, pottery classes, weekend hikes, even dancing on a rooftop under fairy lights when someone played my favorite song. Every day added a little more color to the version of me I was becoming. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept in. Moments when I wondered if I had overreacted, if I had been too harsh, if I had somehow misunderstood what my father meant. But those thoughts faded whenever I remembered the look of surprise on his face the night I finally stood up for myself. It wasn't shock that I spoke, it was shock that I had finally stopped shrinking. I realized then that there was never anything wrong with me. I was never too much or not enough. I was simply in the wrong place, under the wrong spotlight, surrounded by people who chose to dim me so they could shine brighter. But here, 2,000 miles away, I was learning to shine for myself. Not out of spite, not to prove anything to anyone, just because I finally could. And with every sunrise that slipped through my blinds and brushed across my new life, I felt myself rising too, steadily, quietly, beautifully, into someone I was proud to be. Time has a way of softening memories, even the painful ones, but it also sharpens clarity. As the months turned into a year, and the year stretched into 2, I realized how much distance can teach you, not just about the people you leave behind, but about the parts of yourself you finally allow to surface. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony sipping tea, the city glowing beneath me like a constellation of second chances. My plants were thriving, little green reminders that things grow differently when they're cared for. I had just finished reviewing a proposal for a project I was leading, something I never would have imagined being trusted with back home, when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, my father. For a moment, I stared at the screen, feeling the old heaviness try to crawl back into my chest. But it didn't succeed. Not this time. I answered, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of a calm curiosity I hadn't felt before. His voice was quieter than I remembered, slower, like he was choosing his words with unusual care. He asked how I was, if I was still enjoying the city, if work was going well. I told him yes. It was all going very well. There was a pause on the line, one heavy enough to hint at things he didn't know how to say. Finally, he cleared his throat and mentioned he had heard about my promotion from a relative. I could hear the effort in his voice when he said, "That's impressive. You've done well." A younger version of me would have hung on to those words like they were oxygen, starving for even the smallest breath of validation. But sitting there with a gentle breeze brushing past my face, surrounded by a life I had built on my own terms, I realized something startling. I didn't need his approval anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared about myself more. He tried to keep the conversation going, asking if I might visit soon, saying it might be good for the family. His tone held a faint trace of something unfamiliar. Maybe regret, maybe longing, maybe the fear of being left behind by the daughter he never expected to leave. I listened, not out of hope, but out of understanding. Parents don't always know how to undo the damage they've caused. Some never acknowledge it. Some try quietly, awkwardly, in half-formed sentences that arrive years too late. And I realized in that moment that I didn't need an apology to move forward. I had already moved forward without it. When the call ended, I set the phone down gently and leaned back in my chair, watching the lights shimmer across the skyline. I felt something warm spread through me, a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet victory. I had once believed my worth depended on being someone he could be proud of. But life, distance, and growth had taught me something far more powerful. I didn't exist to be someone's pride. I existed to become myself, and I had. In ways he never imagined. In ways even I never imagined. The girl who once swallowed her voice at a dinner table had grown into a woman who built a life she didn't need permission to live. And that, I realized, was the greatest triumph of all. In the quiet that followed that phone call, I understood something I had been chasing my entire life without realizing it. I didn't leave home to prove my father wrong or to punish him for the years he made me feel small. I left to give myself the chance to become someone he never took the time to see. Someone whole, someone brave, someone worthy, and I did. I built a life filled with peace instead of tension, love instead of judgment, and laughter that didn't come at my expense. I surrounded myself with people who didn't need me to shrink for them to feel tall. I learned that taking up space wasn't a flaw. It was a sign of living fully, boldly, unapologetically. Maybe one day my father will understand the daughter he lost the moment he decided she was nothing more than an inconvenience. Maybe he won't, but either way, the ending is the same. I am no longer waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I am building my own, a table where voices are soft, truths are welcomed, and no one is afraid to be exactly who they are. And most importantly, a table where no one ever jokes about anyone taking up space. Because in the life I've created, taking up space is not just allowed, it is celebrated.